The Velocari Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. They had conquered more than 300 different species across the galaxy. They had destroyed civilizations that were older than their own. In all that time, they had never failed to bring a new species under their control. It usually took them less than one galactic cycle to break the spirit of any world they chose to conquer. So when their scout ships picked up strained radio signals coming from a small yellow star at the edge of the Orion Arm, nobody in the Empire paid much attention. The signals were primitive. The technology was basic. It was clear that whatever species lived on that little blue planet had not even discovered faster than light travel yet. High Commander Zethros received the report on his personal screen. He was a massive creature, standing nearly 9 feet tall, with hard black chitin covering his body and 4 arms that could crush metal. He had personally overseen the conquest of 67 worlds. He glanced at the data about this new planet. The inhabitants called it Earth and made a small sound of dismissal. "Another primitive species," he said to his aide. "Send a delegation? Give them the standard offer. Submit or die." The first Velocari ships entered Earth's solar system on a cold morning in January 2147. They passed by the outer planets without slowing down. They ignored the human research stations on Mars. They flew straight toward the blue and green world that was home to 8 billion humans. The lead ship was enormous. It was 3 miles long and covered in weapons that could level entire cities. When it took position above New York City, it blocked out the sun and cast a shadow that stretched for miles. People on the streets stopped and stared. Traffic came to a halt. News cameras pointed upward. The whole world held its breath. Inside the United Nations building, diplomats and leaders scrambled to respond. Nobody had ever planned for this. Nobody had ever truly believed that aliens would come to Earth. But here they were, and someone had to talk to them. Kevin Marsh was 52 years old. He had spent 30 years as a diplomat, serving in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He had negotiated with warlords, dictators, and terrorists. He had been shot at, kidnapped, and left for dead more than once. Nothing surprised him anymore. When the call came asking him to meet the alien delegation, he simply finished his coffee, put on his jacket, and walked outside. The Velocari ambassador was waiting in the plaza. It was a terrifying sight. 8 feet of gleaming black armor, multiple limbs, and eyes that looked like pools of liquid darkness. Behind it stood 20 Velocari soldiers, each one armed with weapons that hummed with deadly energy. Kevin walked up to them alone. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and a look of mild annoyance on his face. "You're blocking the sun," he said, "and you didn't call ahead." The Velocari ambassador made a sound that the translation device rendered as laughter. It was not a pleasant sound. "You are brave for such a small creature," the ambassador said. "But bravery will not save your species. I am here to deliver a message from the Velocari Empire." Kevin took a sip of his coffee. "I'm listening. Your world has been chosen for incorporation into the Empire. You have 2 options. Submit peacefully and serve the Velocari, or resist and be destroyed. Every species we have encountered has faced this choice. Every species has submitted in the end. The only question is how many of your people will die before you accept the truth." Behind Kevin, a young woman named Denise Ortega was already on her phone. She was a communications officer, and she was sending everything she heard directly to military command centers around the world. Kevin finished his coffee. He looked at the massive alien ship overhead. He looked at the armed soldiers. He looked at the ambassador. "Yeah, that's not going to work for us," he said. "But I'll pass your message along to the Joint Chiefs. They'll want to discuss it." The ambassador tilted its head. No species had ever responded like this before. There was supposed to be fear. There was supposed to be begging. This small human with his bitter drink showed neither. "You have 72 hours to surrender," the ambassador said. "After that, we will begin the cleansing." Kevin nodded slowly. 72 hours. Got it. Is there anything else? You do not seem to understand your situation, human. We have destroyed civilizations far greater than yours. We have weapons that can turn your cities to glass. Your primitive technology cannot hope to stand against us. Kevin smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Let me tell you something about humans," he said. "We've been killing each other since before we came down from the trees. We've survived ice ages, plagues, and 2 world wars. We've split the atom and walked on the moon. Every time someone tells us we can't do something, we find a way to do it anyway." He stepped closer to the ambassador. The Velokari soldiers raised their weapons, but Kevin didn't flinch. "You want to conquer Earth? You're welcome to try. But I promise you this, whatever happens, it won't be easy. And it won't be quick. We don't surrender. We don't give up. And we never, ever forget when someone hurts us." The ambassador stared at him for a long moment. Then it turned and walked back toward its ship. 72 hours, it said over its shoulder. Use them wisely. The ships lifted off and returned to orbit. Kevin watched them go. Then he turned to Denise. "Get me a secure line to every world leader," he said. "We've got work to do." The response came 47 hours later. Every nation on Earth, despite their differences and conflicts, sent the same message to the Velokari fleet. No. Some added more colorful language. Some included detailed explanations of exactly what the Velokari could do with their offer. But the core message was the same. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not submit. If the Velokari wanted Earth, they would have to take it. High Commander Zethros received the response in his command chamber. He read it 3 times, certain there must be some mistake. No species had ever refused before. No species had ever been foolish enough to choose destruction over submission. "So be it," he said finally. "Begin the cleansing." He did not know it yet, but he had just made the worst mistake in the 12,000-year history of the Velokari Empire. He had declared war on humanity, and humanity was about to teach the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. The first strikes came on the 3rd day. High Commander Zethros gave the order from his flagship, and kinetic rounds began falling from orbit like metal rain. Each round was a simple tungsten rod, 20 feet long and weighing several tons. They carried no explosives. They didn't need any. Falling from space at incredible speed, they hit with the force of nuclear bombs. Chicago was the first city to burn. Then Mumbai. Then London. Then São Paulo. The Velokari targeted population centers, military bases, and government buildings. Standard protocol. They had done this to dozens of worlds before. The pattern was always the same. Massive destruction followed by overwhelming ground invasion. The survivors would be too broken to resist, but Earth was not like other worlds. And humans were not like other species. What the Velokari did not understand was that Earth was what scientists would call a death world. The planet was not supposed to produce intelligent life. Everything about it was hostile. The gravity was high, which meant that any creature living there had to develop strong bones and muscles just to survive. The axial tilt created extreme seasons, burning summers, and freezing winters that changed the entire environment every few months. The tectonic plates beneath the surface were constantly moving, causing earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And then there was the water. More than 60% of Earth's surface was covered in oceans. These oceans were filled with salt, a substance that could corrode metal over time. They were home to creatures with hundreds of teeth, poisonous tentacles, and crushing pressure at their depths. The Velokari had never seen anything like it. On most civilized worlds, water was precious and rare. On Earth, it fell from the sky regularly and sometimes froze into storms that could kill in minutes. Humans had evolved on this nightmare world. They had survived ice ages that covered half the planet in glaciers. They had survived plagues that killed millions. They had survived predators with claws and fangs and venom. Over millions of years, they had become the most dangerous predators on their own planet. And then they had started killing each other. The Volocari expected the orbital bombardment to break human spirit. They expected panic and despair. They expected the survivors to come crawling out of the rubble, ready to surrender. What they got instead was something they had never encountered before. They got angry humans. In the ruins of Chicago, a man named Danny Ruiz pulled himself out of a collapsed building. He was bleeding from a cut on his head. His left arm was broken. 3 of his squad members were dead. But Danny was a Marine, and Marines didn't stop fighting just because they were hurt. He found his radio and called for a status report. Within an hour, he had organized the survivors in his sector into a functional resistance unit. Within 2 hours, they had set up a field hospital and started evacuating civilians. Within 3 hours, they were tracking Volocari troop movements and planning counterattacks. A young soldier named Megan Cole came running up to him, her face covered in dust and someone else's blood. "Sir, we've got hostiles landing in Sector 7. About 200 of them." Danny looked up from his cracked tablet. "Send the Hernandez brothers and their squad." Megan hesitated. "Sir, shouldn't we send more people? 200 is a lot." Danny almost smiled. The Hernandez boys spent 4 tours in the Congo insurgency. They've been fighting since they were 19 years old. 200 bugs aren't going to be a problem. He was right. The Volocari landing force was wiped out in less than an hour. The Hernandez brothers lost 2 soldiers. The aliens lost everyone. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. In Tokyo, office workers and students formed militias within days of the first strikes. In Moscow, retired soldiers came out of their homes with weapons they had kept hidden for decades. In Brazil, street gangs and police officers who had been enemies for years put aside their differences and fought side by side. The Volocari commanders could not understand what they were seeing. Their reports made no sense. How could a species that had just lost millions of people in orbital strikes be fighting harder than before? How could civilians with primitive weapons be defeating trained soldiers? How could the humans organize so quickly without central command? The answer was simple, but the Volocari had no way to understand it. Humans had been fighting wars against each other for all of recorded history. They had developed tactics for every possible situation. They knew how to fight in cities, in jungles, in deserts, and in mountains. They knew how to fight when they were outnumbered. They knew how to fight when they were outgunned. Most importantly, they knew how to keep fighting when any reasonable species would have given up. High Commander Zethros received reports of mounting casualties. He ordered more troops to the surface. He ordered heavier bombardment. He brought in armored vehicles and air support. None of it helped. The humans just kept fighting. They learned quickly. They adapted faster than any species the Volocari had ever encountered. Within a week, they had figured out that Volocari armor had a weak point at the joint between the chest and stomach. Within 2 weeks, they had captured enough alien weapons to reverse engineer them. Within a month, they were using the Volocari's own technology against them. A private named Nina Brooks became famous when a video spread across the resistance networks. It showed her taking down 3 Volocari soldiers by herself, using nothing but a hunting knife and knowledge of their anatomy. She was 19 years old. An old sergeant named Lawrence Price developed tactics that turned the aliens' superior numbers against them. He would lure them into narrow streets and tall buildings where their size became a disadvantage. Then he would hit them from every direction at once. The Velocari called it the meat grinder. They learned to fear urban combat, and a 17-year-old high school student named Timothy Grant hacked into a Velocari communications satellite using a modified gaming console. He gave Earth's forces real-time intelligence on enemy movements. The military gave him a medal. He asked for a better computer. 6 months into the war, the Velocari controlled nothing on Earth's surface. They had complete orbital superiority. They had better weapons, better ships, and more soldiers. But every time they landed troops, those troops died. Every time they established a base, it was destroyed within days. Every time they thought they had won a sector, the humans came back and took it from them. High Commander Zethra stood in his command chamber and stared at the casualty reports. He had lost more soldiers in 6 months on Earth than he had lost in his entire career of conquest. What are these creatures? He whispered to himself. He was beginning to understand. Too late, he was beginning to understand that he had not invaded a primitive world. He had invaded a planet of predators. And the predators were just getting started. 1 year into the war, everything began to change. Admiral Patricia Vance stood on the bridge of the carrier USS Defiance. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles. The military had pulled her out of retirement 3 days after the invasion began. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a time since then. But she was still standing, and she planned to keep standing until this war was over. Through the bridge window, she could see the lunar shipyards. A year ago, they had been small research stations studying the moon's surface. Now, they were the largest construction facilities humanity had ever built. Thousands of workers lived there permanently, working day and night to build ships. "Ma'am, we finished the reverse engineering." Patricia turned to face her chief engineer, a tired-looking man named Carlos Reyes. He had dark circles under his eyes and coffee stains on his uniform. But he was smiling. "The faster-than-light drives?" Patricia asked. "Yes, ma'am. The team at Caltech cracked it last night. We can start production immediately. First human-built FTL ship should be ready in 3 months." Patricia let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. 3 months. They took centuries to develop that technology. Carlos nodded. Dr. Lopez called it aggressive innovation. She said, "Give humans a problem and a deadline, and we'll build a solution out of spite and duct tape." This was the truth about humanity that the Velocari had failed to understand. Humans didn't just fight. They learned. They adapted. They took whatever their enemies threw at them and found ways to use it against them. From the first day of the invasion, teams of scientists and engineers had been studying every piece of Velocari technology they could get their hands on. Crashed ships were taken apart piece by piece. Captured weapons were analyzed down to the molecular level. Dead aliens were examined by doctors who worked to understand their biology, and humans improved on what they found. The Velocari energy weapons were powerful but heavy. Human engineers made them lighter and more accurate. The Velocari armor was strong but had weak points. Human factories produced rounds specifically designed to exploit those weaknesses. The Velocari ships were fast but hard to maneuver. Human designers created vessels that could turn on a dime. The lunar shipyards were proof of what humanity could accomplish when survival was on the line. Before the invasion, getting materials to the moon had been expensive and slow. Now, there was a constant stream of rockets carrying metal, equipment, and people. Factories that would have taken decades to build on Earth had been constructed in months. Entire cities had grown up around the shipyards, filled with workers who had volunteered to live in space for the duration of the war. Patricia walked through the shipyards every day. She saw engineers working 20-hour shifts. She saw factory workers sleeping next to their machines so they could start again as soon as they woke up. She saw teenagers who had lied about their age to join the effort, and grandparents who had come out of retirement to share their knowledge. Everyone had lost someone in the bombardments. Everyone had a reason to fight down on Earth. The ground war continued. The Velocari still held orbital superiority, but their control of the surface had been reduced to a handful of heavily fortified bases. Human resistance forces attacked them constantly, never letting them rest, never giving them a moment of peace. The Velocari had tried everything. They had used chemical weapons, and humans had developed filters and countermeasures within weeks. They had used biological weapons, and human scientists had created vaccines before the plagues could spread. They had tried to destroy human food production, and humans had built underground farms that the aliens couldn't reach. Every tactic the Velocari used, humanity found a way to defeat. And then humanity used those same tactics back, but better. A captured Velocari officer was being interrogated at a base in Nevada. His name was Sub-Commander Vareth, and he had been in charge of a company that tried to take Phoenix. 40 of his soldiers had landed with him. He was the only survivor. The human officer questioning him was a woman named Rosa Delgado. She spoke calmly, almost gently, as she asked her questions. "Why did you come to our planet?" she asked. Vareth's translator rendered his response in flat tones. "The Empire expands. It is what we do. It is what we have always done. Didn't anyone warn you about us?" Vareth was silent for a moment. "There were reports from other species. They said humans were dangerous, that you should be destroyed from orbit and never engaged on the surface. We thought they were exaggerating. We thought they were weak species making excuses for their failures." Rosa leaned forward. "And now?" "Now I understand." Vareth's voice held something that might have been fear. "You are not like the others. You do not break. You do not surrender. You just keep coming, no matter what we do. It's like fighting a tide. We can push back the water, but it always returns." Rosa smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Do you know what we call ourselves?" she asked. "We call ourselves survivors. Every human alive today is the descendant of people who survived everything this planet could throw at them. Ice ages, famines, plagues, wars. We survived it all. And we'll survive you too." Back at the lunar shipyards, Patricia watched as the frame of the first human FDL ship took shape. It was smaller than Velocari vessels, but it was built tough. It could take more damage and keep flying. It could turn faster and react quicker. And it was just the first of many. "What are we calling her?" Carlos asked, standing beside the Admiral. Patricia thought about all the people who had died in the past year. She thought about the cities that had been destroyed. She thought about the families that had been torn apart. And she thought about what came next. "Persistence," she said finally. "We're calling her Persistence, because that's what we do. We persist. No matter what, we keep going." The shipyard workers heard the name and started to cheer. Someone painted it on the ship's hull in big white letters. And below it, they added a motto that would soon become famous across the galaxy. "We do not forgive. We do not forget." The Velocari had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest. They had found something very different. They had found a species that learned from every defeat, adapted to every challenge, and came back stronger every time. And now that species was building ships, the war was about to enter a new phase. And this time, humanity would be doing the attacking. 2 years after the invasion began, the first human fleet left Earth's solar system. Admiral Patricia Vance stood on the bridge of the HSS Persistence, watching the stars stretch and blur as the ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. Around her, 15 other ships made the same jump. They were smaller than Velokari warships, but they were fast, tough, and crewed by men and women who had spent 2 years learning how to kill aliens. The target was a Velokari staging base on a planet called Theron Prime. Intelligence reports said it held about 6,000 troops, 24 ships, and enough supplies to support operations for months. It was one of 17 bases the Velokari used to launch attacks on Earth. In 2 hours, it would be gone. Commander Jack Brennan, the fleet's tactical officer, pulled up the battle plan on the main screen. He was young for his rank, only 34, but he had earned his position by surviving battles that had killed officers with twice his experience. "The Velokari don't know we have FTL capability," Jack said. "They think we're still stuck in our solar system. They have no idea we're coming." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's going to change today. After this attack, they'll know. They'll start preparing." "Let them prepare," said a voice from behind. Captain Hannah Wells stepped onto the bridge, dressed in combat armor and carrying a rifle that had been modified to fire Velokari energy rounds. She was the commander of the ground assault force, and she had a reputation for being absolutely fearless in combat. She also had a reputation for hating the Velokari more than anyone else in the fleet. Her entire family had died in the Chicago bombardment. Her parents, her husband, her 6-year-old daughter. She had been away on deployment when it happened. She had watched the city burn from a military satellite feed, unable to do anything. Now she did plenty. "Captain Wells," Patricia said, "are your people ready?" "Ready and eager, ma'am. We've been waiting 2 years for this." The fleet dropped out of FTL speed at the edge of the Theron system. The Velokari had orbital defense platforms around the planet, but they were pointed inward, designed to keep prisoners from escaping rather than to stop an invasion. Nobody invaded Velokari space. It simply didn't happen. Until now. The first wave of human ships hit the orbital platforms before the aliens even knew they were under attack. Missiles and energy beams tore through structures that had never been designed to withstand a real assault. Within 20 minutes, the orbital defenses were gone. The second wave hit the ships in the system. The Velokari crews scrambled to respond, but they were confused and unprepared. Human pilots flew circles around them, striking from angles the aliens didn't expect and retreating before they could respond. 6 Velokari warships were destroyed in the first hour. The rest tried to flee. None of them made it. Then came the ground assault. Hannah Wells was the first one out of the dropship when it touched down outside the main Velokari base. The air smelled like burning metal and ozone. Alien soldiers were running in every direction, trying to form defensive lines. They were too slow. "Push forward," Hannah shouted. "Don't give them time to organize." Her troops surged across the landing field. They moved like a single organism, each soldier covering the others, each squad supporting its neighbors. They had trained for this moment for months. Every scenario, every tactic, every possible enemy response had been practiced until it was automatic. The Velokari garrison commander had 6,000 troops under his command. He had been told that humans were primitive creatures who couldn't possibly threaten the Empire's core worlds. He was beginning to realize that someone had lied to him. His soldiers fought hard. They were veterans, most of them, with years of combat experience against other species. But they had never faced anything like this. The humans didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They didn't seem to feel fear at all. They just kept coming, wave after wave, pouring into the base like water through a broken dam. The commander died 3 hours after the attack began. He was shot by a human sniper who had crawled through a ventilation shaft to reach a position behind enemy lines. He never saw who killed him. Hannah led her squad into the command center. The fighting there was brutal and close. Energy weapons lit up the darkness. Soldiers on both sides fell. But in the end, only humans were left standing. Sergeant Victor Salazar, Hannah's second-in-command, found the base's main computer system. He was a former IT specialist who had joined the Marines after the invasion. His family had survived, but many of his friends had not. "Captain, I found their database," he called out. "They've got files on us." Species profile. Hannah walked over, stepping over the body of a Velocari officer. "What does it say?" Victor's face went pale as he read the translated text. Species designation: Apex Predator. Category Omega. Homeworld, Class 12 Death World. Extreme environmental hazards. Physiological advantages include high endurance, rapid healing, and exceptional adaptability. Psychological profile indicates extreme aggression when threatened, inability to accept defeat, and tendency toward creative violence. He paused, scrolling down. There's a recommendation at the bottom. It says, "Immediate extermination advised. Do not engage in ground combat under any circumstances. Do not attempt to conquer. Destroy from orbit only. If orbital destruction is not possible, withdraw and quarantine the system. Under no circumstances should Velocari forces engage humans in direct combat." Hannah let out a short laugh. "Someone figured us out." "Yes, ma'am." The date on this file is 3 months after the invasion started. They knew. The High Command knew how dangerous we were. And they kept sending soldiers anyway. Looks like it. Hannah looked around the ruined command center. Velocari bodies lay everywhere. Some of them had died fighting. Some had died trying to run. None of them had escaped. "Tag this data for intelligence," she said. "The Admiral will want to see it." Outside the base, the battle was winding down. The surviving Velocari soldiers had surrendered when they realized that escape was impossible. Human troops were rounding them up and putting them in holding areas. Medical teams were treating wounded soldiers from both sides. Admiral Patricia Vance arrived on the surface an hour after the fighting ended. She walked through the base, looking at the destruction, counting the cost. "Casualties?" she asked. 112 dead, Jack reported. 207 wounded. "We lost 2 ships in the orbital battle." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment. 112 more names to add to the memorial wall back home. 112 more families to notify. But the Velocari had lost 6,000 soldiers and their entire fleet in this system. The first human offensive operation had been a complete success. "Send a message to Earth," Patricia said. "Tell them Therum Prime is ours. And tell them we're not stopping here." She looked up at the alien sky, at the strange stars that no human had ever seen before. "They wanted a war," she said quietly. "Now they've got one." 5 years after the first Velocari ship cast its shadow over New York City, the war came to an end. It did not end with a treaty signed in a neutral location. It did not end with diplomats shaking hands and making promises. It ended with human soldiers standing in the ruins of the Velocari Imperial Palace, their boots crushing the broken symbols of an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 12,000 years. High Commander Zethros knelt on the steps of the palace. His once gleaming chitin armor was cracked and scorched. 3 of his forearms hung useless at his sides, broken in the final battle. Around him lay the bodies of his honor guard, the last soldiers who had remained loyal to the Empire. Behind him, the city burned. The capital of the Velocari Empire, a city that had stood for 10,000 years, was being torn apart by human forces. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The Velocari had hidden weapons throughout the city. They had planned to fight to the last soldier. They had sworn never to surrender, but that was before they truly understood what they were fighting against. Admiral Patricia Vance walked up the palace steps slowly. She was 70 now, her hair completely silver, and she walked with a cane. An injury at the Battle of Nexus Station had damaged her leg beyond repair. The doctors had wanted to give her a cybernetic replacement, but she had refused. She said she wanted to remember the cost. Commander Hannah Wells walked beside her. Hannah had risen through the ranks during the war, becoming one of the most decorated officers in human history. She had led assaults on more than 40 Velocari worlds. She had never lost a battle. She had also never stopped hating the aliens who had killed her family. But over the years, something had changed. The hatred was still there, but it had become cold and controlled. She no longer fought out of rage. She fought because it needed to be done. Zethros looked up as the two women approached. His translator was still working, rendering his words in the flat mechanical tones that humans had learned to hate. "You came to our world," Patricia said. Her voice was quiet but carried clearly in the silence. "You killed our people. You burned our cities. You thought we would submit." Zethro's multiple eyes blinked slowly. "We did not know. We could not have known what you were. You should have asked. 300 species in your empire. Surely some of them tried to warn you." "They did." Zethros made a sound that might have been bitter laughter. "They told us that humans were death incarnate. That your world was a place of nightmares. That you had survived things that would have killed any other species. We thought they were making excuses for their own weakness." Patricia nodded slowly. "And now? Now I know the truth. You are not like the others. You do not conquer because you want to expand. You do not fight because you enjoy killing. You fight because you refuse to accept defeat. You fight because surrender is not in your nature. You are—" He paused, searching for the right word. "You are survivors. It is not just something you do. It is what you are." Hannah stepped forward. Her hand rested on her weapon, but she did not draw it. "What should we do with them, Admiral?" Patricia looked at the broken alien. She looked at the burning city. She thought about all the people who had died in this war, on both sides. She thought about the years of pain and suffering, and she thought about what humanity wanted to be now that the war was over. "Let them live," she said finally. Hannah's eyes widened. "Ma'am, let them go. All of them. Every surviving Velocari, every occupied world, every ship and station. Let them go back to their space and rebuild what they can." Zethros stared at her. "You would show mercy? After everything we did to you?" Patricia met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, because that's the difference between us. You conquered because you believed you had the right to rule others. We fought because we had no choice. You destroyed civilizations for the crime of being weaker than you. We ended your empire because you threatened our existence." She stepped closer to him. "But we don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to become what you were. We want to go home and rebuild our world and live in peace. And we want everyone else to know that if they leave us alone, we'll leave them alone." She turned to Hannah. "Let them live. Let them go back to every corner of the galaxy and tell the other species what happened here. Let them tell them what happens when you declare war on humanity." Hannah was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." The word spread quickly. Across the galaxy, species that have been conquered by the Velocari watched in amazement as the humans released their prisoners and withdrew from occupied worlds. The empire that had ruled for 12,000 years was gone, but the humans were not replacing it with an empire of their own. They were just going home. The Galactic Council, a loose alliance of independent species that had spent millennia hiding from the Velocari, called an emergency meeting. They had expected the humans to become the new masters of the galaxy. They had prepared to submit to new conquerors. Instead, they received a message from Earth. It said simply, "We want to be friends. We want to trade and learn and explore together. But we will defend ourselves if we have to. We hope we don't have to." In the years that followed, humanity became something new in the galaxy. Not conquerors, but protectors. Not rulers, but allies. Species that had lived in fear for thousands of years found themselves welcomed by the strange creatures from the Death World. Trade routes opened. Knowledge was shared. For the first time in galactic history, there was hope for real peace, but everyone remembered what had happened to the Volocari. Everyone remembered what humans could do when they were pushed too far. And in diplomatic chambers and military academies across the galaxy, one phrase became common wisdom. Whatever you do, do not anger the humans. Patricia Vance retired after the war. She spent her remaining years on Earth in a small house near what had once been Chicago. The city had been rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before. A memorial stood in the center, bearing the names of everyone who had died in the bombardment. She visited it every year on the anniversary of the attack. She would stand there for hours, reading the names, remembering. Hannah Wells visited her sometimes. She had become an admiral herself, commanding the fleet that patrolled human space. She was older now, softer in some ways, though still dangerous when she needed to be. Do you ever regret it? Hannah asked once. Letting them live? Patricia thought about the question for a long time. No, she said finally. We proved we could destroy them. That was important. But we also proved we didn't have to. That was more important. That's what makes us different from them. She looked up at the sky, at the stars that humans had finally reached. We're the most dangerous species in the galaxy, she said. But we're also capable of mercy, of kindness, of choosing to be better than our enemies. She smiled. That's what makes us human. And somewhere out in the stars, in 1,000 different languages, on 1,000 different worlds, the story was told of the small blue planet that had broken the greatest empire in history. The story of the apex predators who chose mercy over revenge. The story of the deadliest species alive and why you should never, ever make them angry. The story of humanity.